Okay. Thank you for coming here, and first of all, we should thank Father Philip-Neri Reese, OP, for joining us and for presenting to us a Thomistic position on the politics and on the law. It is one of the main purposes of our Center for Studies in Natural Law and Legal Analysis to have more debates on the concepts of natural law in the context I was discussing with Father Philip-Neri before about the backbone of the Romanian legal theory as being more or less a positivist backbone. So we need to put more additions of natural law in order to rebalance the entire legal theory here in Romania. So I hope that you will share our view here in the Center of Natural Law about this approach. Father Philip-Neri Reese, OP, is a Dominican friar, a Catholic priest, but most and foremost for us now, he is a philosopher. So he will try to tell us what he gathered from the philosophy of Thomas Aquinas, of Saint Thomas Aquinas. We would say Beatus Thomas Aquinas here in the East, about the necessity of the prerequisites of a legal system to be considered a proper legal system. So in this line, I would try to put some context before Father Reese will make his demonstration. And this context would be focused on the Romanian recent case law. So I will start with the recent case law on PhD titles in Romania. Why? Because I think this is a good illustration of why the law should be more than a simple political decision by the parliament or by a certain court. If we look in the abstract on the data of this debate, we will see that from the pure theory of law, let's call it like this by using a Kelsenian phrase, the argument of the Constitutional Court in 2022 was perfect, was round. The main idea behind that argument is that state power should be limited. The state should not abuse its power. And the consequence of this principle is that when the state, through one of its agencies, grant a right, a privilege to a citizen, that right, that privilege cannot be withdrawn unilaterally by the state. It can be withdrawn only for proper cause and only after a fair trial will take place. Well, this is exactly what the Constitutional Court said. If the Ministry of Education awarded the PhD title to a person, the same ministry cannot, several years later, rescind its decision and say this is not a valid title. It should go in front of a court and have a trial explaining why that title should be cancelled because of some flaws in the award process. Well, this is the theoretical argument. And I think, at least for me, this argument is convincing. Now, how this argument created questionable results in practice. There were some cases which were in the press explaining that the thesis of some doctors were copied without indicating the source from other sources. And somebody observed these inadequacies of that thesis. Well, the ministry, for some reason, said, yes, you are right. The thesis was not correct because of this plagiarism. So therefore, I rescind the PhD title that I issued several years ago, when I was not aware about this defect in the thesis. Well, the Constitutional Court said you cannot rescind that title, because you award it once, you cannot take it back without a proper trial. Now, the tricky part is here that who will start a trial in this case? Of course, the holder of the title has no interest in starting a trial, unless he's masochistic. The state would start a trial, but it is said that the state, in most circumstances, does not have a legal standing because the state action already expired or is time-barred. So who would ask for the cancellation of that title? Nobody. So the title remains, even if it is flawed. You see, a very good abstract legal reasoning based on a very good principle of limiting state power reaches contrary results, reaches unethical results, which brings us to the theme of lex in justa non est lex. Any law should be considered law, or there should be some other characteristics added to the idea of the law than the pure technical qualification of the law. The law, as a matter of fact, is a command or a commandment. And this commandment should be engraved by authority. Whether authority is a natural authority or it is an artificial authority, even brought by power, this is a totally different issue. I will not enter into these details. But like in the children's game, Simon says, a law functions like this. If the law says you should jump, then you should jump. If someone says jump, you should jump. Well, shouldn't we think whether or not it is reasonable to jump in that particular circumstances? The positivist theory says that no, you should not think about this. You should just follow the law's command. In theory, this is a simple task, since the law should reflect the will of the community and each individual is part of that community. So basically the law reflects the will of each individual. In practice, of course, there are different levels of adaptation. And the ideal government of the people, by the people, for the people that President Lincoln mentioned in his famous Gettysburg Address is not necessarily something that really happens in practice. It's more like a rhetorical figure of speech. Now, the problem here, and I think this is also a general problem with the Romanian educational system, is the problem of critical thinking. Does the law allows the subjects to have independent critical thinking? Can they think, should I obey this law or not, because this law is just, this law is unjust, so I will obey only just laws? Of course, in practice, this kind of argument will bring, or it is potentially bringing chaos, because then everybody will obey only the laws he considers that are right for his interests. And therefore, one of the principles of the law is that you should obey all the law. You should not say that you do not recognize one or other of them. And the positivist argument could be stated in a nutshell as follows. The law is the reason of the people, and the people cannot be wrong. And indeed, in a functional constitutional democracy, various groups will challenge the laws when they are unjust. So therefore, an unjust law should not be enacted as law. This is the theory. Again, in practice, we see that there are some cases where unjust laws make their way to being at least published in the official gazette. And I refer now to the infamous Government Emergency Ordinance 13, unlucky number 13, which created a lot of revolt in the public with a lot of meetings in front of the government building, because that ordinance was meant to cover the criminal deeds of the government members in order to create some sort of immunity for the government, criminal immunity for the government members. At that point, the people stand against that regulation, and apparently they succeeded. The ordinance never entered into force, so therefore it did not produce legal effects. However, in the aftermath of those protests, what was viewed as just mere consequences of the entire civic action, the Constitutional Court issued two decisions, 63 and 68 in 2017, which, in my opinion, destroyed the entire checks and balances system of the Romanian Constitution. Because they said, first, that there should be a clear separation between the three powers, so there will be no balance whatsoever and no checks whatsoever between the three powers. Each of them has its area of specialty where they have plenitude of power, and nobody should be able to control them. And second, that most importantly, the judiciary cannot control the legislative process. It's like, in the words attributed to Otto von Bismarck, laws are like sausages, it is better not to see them being made. So nobody should inquire how a law emerged. A law is a law, and the law should be obeyed. Which brings me to the conflict between the black letter law and the spirit of the law, or the spirit of the laws. Well, in here, at least on the other side of the ocean, there is the almost half a century battle between originalists and organicists in interpreting the US Constitution. But the same battle is done also on the, happens also on the continent. And the two positions are stating the former, we should follow the letter of the law, while the latter says we should think what is behind that letter. We should follow the spirit of the law. None of these positions are perfectly tenable, because each of these positions can have an extremist point. However, if we are looking, for example, to the Bible, I would say, and I hope I will not be accused of heresy, that the first organicist that we know was Jesus Christ himself. At least in the words that are told to us by St. Paul in the Epistle to Romans, Jesus was saying that the Christians should not obey the black letter of the Ten Commandments, but rather to go over for the spirit behind those Ten Commandments and to obey the spirit which is laid in by God in those commandments. So from this perspective, from Montesquieu, 1748, to Louis Josserand, 1939, I think the spirit of the laws is still something to be caught up with. Well, in this context, of course, all of us have our favorite examples of unjust laws. I will not put here all these laws that we were struggling with at some point in time. But I cannot help but to observe that more and more frequent in the politics of today, various laws are appealing exclusively to emotion rather to reason. And we have, for example, that law that prohibits selling agricultural land to foreigners because the foreigners will steal our country, for example. Or we have that law saying that the banks are bad, and if the poor people is unable to repay the loan, it should have the right to be forgiven of this debt. Or we have more recently the law dealing with the retirement schemes. All these laws were adopted by the parliament with a large popular approval because they appealed to in a very populistic way to the emotions of people rather than to their reason. Thomas Aquinas defined certain qualities of a law. In the Aquinas' system, a law should have a purpose. The law must be for the common good. Today, we are saying the law should observe the public interest. For example, personalized laws are considered unconstitutional. However, if we are looking at the law in 2004, which was drafted in order for the former President Iliescu to be able to be elected senator, it was declared constitutional at that time, and we saw that it could have an effect even this year, 20 years later. And it was very interesting that at that time I saw an article saying that this law is only for one person because there will be another 20 years until another person will be eligible for that law. Look, 20 years passed and another person seemed eligible for that kind of law, and since in the meantime the law was repealed, a new law on the same idea was drafted. We had also laws targeted to certain companies. The legal scholars speak about DEU law, Renault law, Damen law. So we have individual pointed laws. Are them laws at all, or they should be scrapped as not being laws? The second quality of the law, in accordance with Thomas Aquinas, is to identify the authority of its author. The law must be in the scope of the authority making that law. But as we saw, nowadays the Constitutional Court is saying that there should be a strict separation between the powers, and surprise, surprise, the Parliament is the only legislative body, so any law should come from the Parliament. Of course, this in a decision dealing with a law passed by the government, which was considered constitutional. The third quality of the law, in accordance with Aquinas, is the form of that law, and its burden should be equal and apply to all. Today we see the theories of the equal treatment, and the Constitutional Court has a large body of decisions saying that equal treatment does not mean absolute equality or egalitarianism. Well, in the recent discussions, both in Strasbourg at the European Court of Human Rights and in Bucharest at the Constitutional Court, at least in the past decade, the Constitutional Court defined the qualities of the law. They said a law is a law only if it follows certain qualities. Otherwise, it is an unconstitutional law, so it is not a law, and it should not be obeyed. These qualities are developed around the two criteria: the law should be accessible and foreseeable. And I will stop here because each of these criteria contains a lot of details, but I will not bother you anymore because I think right now is the time for Father Philip-Neri Reese, OP, to explain to us what he found in the writings of Thomas Aquinas on the politics of making laws. Thank you.
So thank you very much. I'm too American to sit down and give a lecture, so I'm going to stand. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. This is my first time in Bucharest, my first time in Romania, and my first time in Eastern Europe. So it's really a joy and a pleasure for me to join you. As was mentioned, yes, I am a Dominican friar. Yes, I am a Catholic priest. I am a philosopher by training. And so, in fact, we heard more quotation of scripture in the introduction to the talk than we will hear in the talk. So this is a pure talk in legal theory and political philosophy. And it is going to operate on a pretty high kind of abstract level. Just before I begin, when should I stop? 50, okay. I'll try to go for 45 minutes and then and we'll see how well I succeed. So the title of this talk is Politics as Ethics, a Thomistic Perspective on Law Groups and Goods. And so the adjective Thomistic is important there. So this will also not be a talk that does textual exegesis of Aquinas, right? So Aquinas' thought was the seed of a very rich, long-standing philosophical and theological tradition, and I am simply before you today as a philosopher who stands steeped in that tradition. So my goal here is I want us to do philosophy together, right? And again, I am an American, so the way that I do philosophy is typically American, which means it's scrappy, it's democratic, right? It's kind of dialogical. So, so forgive me if I lack the decorum of a typical professor. So the plan for the talk goes like this. I have a very bold goal. I want to convince you of two things. First, I want to convince you that political society is an intrinsically ethical reality, right? So that's a stronger claim than just saying, look, political society is constituted by human beings are ethical, therefore, of course, inevitably, political society is ethical. That's true, but not what I'm arguing, right? What I'm arguing is that political society as such is an ethical reality. And if that's true, I'm also going to argue and hopefully convince you that laws are intrinsically related to the ethical character of political society. So those are two bold claims, and I characterize them as bold claims in part because I anticipate that some people in this room, maybe even the majority of the people in this room, will be either formed in the tradition of legal positivism or familiar with, maybe even persuaded by, within the natural law side of things, something called the new natural law tradition, which the representatives of which are folks like John Finnis and Germain Grisey. This talk is neither of those things. So I stand before you in order to represent, to pitch, to sell the old classical natural law approach to legal theory and political theory, which is to say, so contra legal positivism, I'm simply going to argue that as a global theory, legal positivism is false. Contra the new natural lawyers, I am going to argue that they have lost the relevance of nature for natural law, and I am here to put it back. So that's the goal of the talk. I want to convince you at least that the classical natural law tradition has substantive, strong arguments that need to be taken very seriously, right? So if you are a legal positivist, I am here to threaten you, right? My hope, maybe you won't be convinced, but my hope is at least that you will feel like the ground you stand on is a little bit shakier than it was before this talk began. And if you are a new natural lawyer, I am here to threaten you, right? And so my hope is that you will go away from this talk, if not convinced, then at least with this suspicion that maybe there's a tighter connection between nature in a broadly Thomistic Aristotelian sense of nature, not a Darwinian sense of nature, that there's maybe a tighter connection between that and political philosophy and legal theory than, if your name is John, you're comfortable with. So that's where I want to go in the next 45 minutes. How are we going to get there? Well, I'm simply going to do 5 things. First, I'm going to try to motivate the topic for you, if that introduction didn't motivate you enough. Then I'm going to begin in a place that is going to sound and seem and perhaps be very strange. So I'm going to start with a bit of social ontology that is extremely naturalistic in character. So probably not what you would expect a Catholic priest and a Dominican friar to give you. So we're going to start by looking at the vast multiplicity of unities that we find in the world around us. I'm then going to identify political society as falling into one particular kind of unity that is a broad classification that we find lots of other instances of all over the world. I'm then going to argue that if political society is in fact a unity of that sort, then it must be essentially ethical in its orientation. And that will establish conclusion 1. I'll then go on to argue that, again, if political society is a unity of that sort, then laws must be intrinsically related to that ethical character of political society. And once I've done that, QED, right? Quod erat demonstrandum. I will have proved the thing that I set out to prove. So, let's begin just by adding a little bit of motivation. Here are some definitions, some particularly famous and influential definitions that have been given to law. And I put in parentheses human law as opposed to like divine law, and positive law as opposed to mere like the natural law. So here are just some definitions of human positive law. John Austin, infamous for the imperative, an imperative legal theory, defined law as a command of the sovereign backed by a sanction. It's clear, it's concise, right? That's a nice, memorable definition of law that, to the ears of a Thomistic legal theorist and political philosopher, is absolutely horrifying. Here's another definition coming from a more sociological approach to law. So this comes from Rudolf von Jhering. Law is the form of the guarantee of conditions of life of society assured by the state's power of constraint. Right? So what von Jhering is sort of envisioning is that, look, what law is it's kind of the shape that our shared life together takes insofar as the shape of our shared life can be guaranteed by the state's power. Because I'm an American, I can't help but include at least one influential American definition of law. So Oliver Wendell Holmes was a Supreme Court justice in the US who's famous for giving what's often referred to as a predictive theory of law. And so there's the way that he's often quoted as, but this is actually the real quote. So his actual definition of law goes like this. Law is the prediction of the incidence of the public force through the instrumentality of the courts. So Holmes's idea is something like this. Look, here's what a law is. A law is a reliable prediction of under what circumstances you are going to be punished by a court. That's what a law is. Now, just a couple observations. First, terms like sanction, constraint, and force, which appear in these three definitions, are all unabashed, unambiguous expressions of power or will. They do not indicate or imply wisdom or reason. So again, for a Thomist philosopher, the red flag is immediately going to go up because this is going to sound like it's defining law within a broader philosophical context of what we would call voluntarism. And in fact, that's true for the positivistic tradition of legal theory. So positivist legal theory is allied almost necessarily to a broader philosophical voluntarism. And for the Thomist tradition, voluntarism is a bad word, right? So when it is possible for us to give a rational, reasoned, sapiential foundation for some kind of social practice, we ought to. And so that is part of the motivation for a natural law approach to political theory and legal theory, is it doesn't rely on appeal to a voluntaristic philosophical basis. More relevant for present purposes is the second observation. Literally nothing about those three definitions of law either requires or entails that laws be essentially connected to moral goodness. And so it is a regularly recognized feature of legal positivism that law is, to use the philosopher cited earlier, right, the legal theorist cited earlier, purely formal. right? You can give an account of law that is purely formal and has no agathological orientation, right? Has no orientation towards the good. So, if I'm right about the two main claims of this talk, then all three of those definitions of law are wrong, right? All three of those definitions of law are deeply and profoundly misleading. And in fact, you can go further and you can say any purely positivist definition of law is going to be just as erroneous. So if you think that matters, stay for the talk, right? If you don't think that any of that matters, then now is your opportunity to scoot out the door. Okay, so let's now start the argument proper. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to start in a strange place, namely by observing a vast multiplicity of unities that we find in the world around us. So we can start with a basic spectrum of unities, and if you want to call this kind of social ontology, you can. The basic spectrum of unity situates a middle ground in between two extremes. The two extremes are what are, in the Latin tradition, are referred to as per se unities and per accidens unities, or kind of unities by happenstance, by coincidence, by accident, are the per accidens ones. And then what often get referred to as substances would be examples of per se unities, right? But you don't even need an Aristotelian kind of metaphysics or ontology of substance to recognize what I'm talking about, right? So I'm not going to talk about substances. I'm just going to talk about per se unities, per accidens unities, and then a kind of unity that falls in between them, which are called unities per ordinem, right, or unities of order. Let me give you some examples of each one of those. So on the right-hand extreme, you have, so to you, so on the right-hand extreme, you have the per accidens unities. These are things like a heap of sand, right? A heap of, there's a sense in which we can talk about one heap of sand, right? And perhaps we could have 4 piles of sand on the table, and then we could, in some relevant sense, count them, right? And so insofar as this is one and that is another, we can say that there's a unity here and a unity there. And what is it a unity of? Well, grains of sand. There are other examples of per accidens unities. If I know at least one person in the room is a mathematician, so set theory provides there are very minimal constraints on what can constitute a set, right? So here's a set. There is such a thing as the set of all of you, me, the Eiffel Tower, and the moon. Great. That is from this perspective, that is a merely per accidens unity. Can we refer to it as a set? Sure, we can. Is it like a robust thing with a kind of resilient identity? No, it's a unity in a very thin sense. On the other end of the spectrum, you have things like us and trees, cats and dogs, right? So organisms are very thick unities, right? So, we engage in processes of homeostasis, right? Where we take in things that are not us and we convert them into us in order to maintain our identity across time, right? A heap of sand does zero work to maintain its identity across time, right? The set of odd objects that I gave you, right, is, at least by my lights, constructed by me in the moment, right, and has no robust, strong, thick identity beyond that. In between those two are unities of order. And these are the things that are especially relevant for us. So some examples of unities of order would be a clock, right? Or a nest, right? So these are unities in the sense that they're put together from other materials. And they have more order and structure than a pile of sand. They're more unified than that weird set of objects that I just kind of invented a moment ago. But they're not as thick and robust and resilient unities as organisms like us. Now, just by way of, so I'm gonna, this argument is inductive, right? So the way to test whether what I'm saying is true or not is just look at your experience of things in the world and see if what I'm saying matches, but I think it will. And when we look at these different unities that we find in the world, we find that they have some characteristic features. So per se unities have this feature. The whole has some kind of proper activity that is not attributable to the parts of the whole. Whereas the parts of a per se unity have no proper activity that is not attributable to the whole. Let me give you an example, right? I just said that I am an example of a per se unity. I do things that no part of me does, like be healthy. Right? So my health is not attributable just to my hand or just to my eye or just to my heart, right? Health is something that is proper to me as a whole and not proper to any of my particular parts, right? Here's another activity, right? Giving a breathtaking lecture at the University of Bucharest, right? You cannot say that my hand gave a breathtaking lecture at the University of Bucharest. You cannot even say that my mind gave a breathtaking lecture at the University of Bucharest, right? The only one who gave a breathtaking lecture at the University of Bucharest was me, the whole. So that verifies A. What verifies B is this. Here's something that my hand does. Grabs the clicker. But I also grab the clicker. Here's something that my eye does. See. I also see. Here's something that my ear does. Hear. But I also hear. So the activities of the parts are attributable to the whole. So this is what's characteristic of per se unities, right? You don't even need to use the language of substance, right? If that's too philosophical, too metaphysical, too ontological for you, don't. All you need to do is just recognize this. This is true of the world we live in. There are unities of this sort. There are unities such that the whole can do something that the parts don't do, and that always does the things that the parts do. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the accidental unities. And these are the reverse. So what's characteristic of things like piles of sand is that the whole has no proper activity that is not attributable to the activity of one of its parts. And the parts have activities that are not attributable to the activity of the whole. Right? So a set, the set of the moon, the Eiffel Tower, and all of us, the set doesn't do anything. It has no proper activities as a set, right? Nevertheless, the Eiffel Tower does things, right? It has a weight, it falls over, right? We do things, right? The moon does things, it waxes and wanes, right? So the proper parts of per occidens unities all have activities that they engage in, but the whole does not. right? So the thinnest sense of unity that we identify in the world around us is exactly a unity of this sort, right? It's a unity where the whole that is unified doesn't do anything. It's causally inefficacious. In between those two are the unities that are relevant for us, unities of order. Here, the whole does have proper activities that are not the proper activities of any of the parts. So that makes it unlike a heap or an accidental unity. But for unities of order, it's also true that the parts have proper activities that are not the activity of the whole. And that makes it different than the per se unities. So let me give you some examples. The classic example of a unity of order is an army. Here's an activity that the army does that no individual part of the army does. Win. Right? The tank battalion does not win the war. The infantry unit does not win the war. The soldier, Private Ryan, does not win the war. The army wins the war. Nevertheless, unlike per se unities, unlike robust unities like you and me, there are things that the parts of the army do that are not attributable to the army. So when one soldier holds fast, it does not follow that the army holds fast. When one soldier flees, it does not follow that the army flees. So just note, right, this is just an empirical claim, right? In the world that we live in, there are unities of these different kinds. There are unities of order, and then on either side of them, there are merely accidental unities and kind of rich, robust per se unities. There's also a spectrum among unities of order. And this has to do with where the principle of the order comes from. So what is it? What's the principle of unification? So I'll start again on the right. So the least unified of all principles, of all unities of order, are cases where the principle of unity is merely conventional and extrinsic outside the unity itself. So a standard example of this would be artifacts. A clock, this microphone, right? This clicker, the camera. All of those artifacts are cases where the principle that unifies all of the component parts is not found in the thing, right? The principle of order for the clock is not found in the clock. And it's not a matter of nature, right? It is constructed by convention. And there are tons of examples of those. But there are other cases of a unity of order where the principle is still conventional, right? It doesn't come about by nature. And yet the principle is intrinsic. So suppose after this breathtaking lecture, some of the people in this audience decide that you are going to form a fan club for Father Philip-Neri Reese, right? And there's a structure to the fan club, right? It's got a president, maybe that's Theodora, right? It's got a secretary, right? It's got a treasurer, right? There are different offices within the fan club. And yet the principle of the fan club is your love for me, right? And so it comes about not by nature, but by convention. You all choose, in your radical freedom to form this fan club, right? It didn't come about by nature. Nevertheless, the principle of the fan club, right, of this social reality, is intrinsic to the fan club, right? It's found in the hearts, so to speak, of the members. So in that sense, a fan club is not like a clock. There are also unities of order where the principle is extrinsic, like the clock, but natural. Examples of these would be things like a nest, a beehive, right? An anthill, right? An anthill is not like a heap, a pile of sand, right? An anthill has an internal structure to it. Now, what is the principle of the anthill's structure and unity? Well, it's just like the nature of ants, right? Ants build anthills by instinct, right? Bees create beehives by instinct, right? Birds build nests by instinct. So they come about by nature, and yet the principle through which they come about and by which they are ordered is extrinsic to the nest, the beehive, the anthill, right? Why? Because ants aren't part of the anthill, right? Bees aren't part of the beehive. Birds aren't part of the nest, right? They're extrinsic to the thing. Most unified of all, however, are unities of order where their principle is natural and intrinsic. Examples of these in the natural world are things like herds of deer, packs of wolves, flocks of seagull, right? Those are social realities. They come about purely by nature, right? Birds don't get together and agree to form a flock, right? Wolves don't get together and agree by convention to form into a pack, right? Those come about through the instinct that's natural to the organism in question. And the organisms are themselves part of the pack, the herd, the flock. So in these cases, you have something that is a unity of order, right? There are things that the herd does that no individual does. And there are things that individuals do that can't be attributed to the herd. Nevertheless, that social reality comes about by nature, and its principle is intrinsic to the thing, to the unity itself, to the herd or the flock or the pack. These have characteristic features, these unities of order. So all unities of order have an external aim. Clocks have an external aim, right, to tell time. Fan clubs have an external aim, right, to appreciate me. Nests have an external aim, right, to foster the growth and the protection of the egg. Herds and packs have an external aim, right, to carry on the species through, like, hunting well. All unities of order also have internal structure. So there's an alpha in the pack. There's a bird that flies at the point of the V in the flock. There's an internal structure to unities of order. And lastly, and importantly, all the internal structures of all those various unities of order can be designated as good or bad precisely with respect to the external aim. So, you could have a clock, the internal structure of which is such that the numbers are very small. That's a bad clock. That's a bad structure for a clock. Why? Well, because the external aim of the clock, the purpose that it serves, is the telling of time. And if the numbers are very tiny, no one will be able to read it, right? A pack that has 3 alphas and no betas is a bad pack. Why? Well, because it will fail, the conflict between 2 alphas or 3 alphas, right, will lead to internal division within the pack that makes it such that it cannot hunt successfully. So the internal structure of a unity of order can be evaluated as good or bad, not morally, right? We're just talking about kind of natural goods and natural bads. in light of the external aim. And again, my argument here is purely inductive, right? I'm just saying, look at the world around you, and I'm confident that you will see that there are all of these kinds of unities. And inductively, when you look at what differentiates unities of order from per accidens unities, we'll find these among their key features. So unities of order have external aims. They, whether they're artifacts like clocks or natural things like herds, they have internal structures, and the internal structures can be evaluated as good or bad based on how well they serve the external aim. Okay, that's the nature part. My claim now is that political society, human political society, is an instance of a natural intrinsic unity of order. So it falls in the same category of things as herds, flocks, and packs. And it does not fall in the category of things like fan clubs, right? So fan clubs are human social realities that are merely conventional. Political society, I submit to you, does not come about by convention, but by nature, right? Take that, Hume. Likewise, the principle for political society is intrinsic to political society itself, right? So the polis is not like a beehive. So that's the key thesis. Political society is a unity of order, the principle of which is natural and intrinsic. So first I'm going to prove to you that it's natural, then I'm going to prove to you that it's intrinsic, and here my arguments will not be inductive. So I'm going to give you a demonstration. So first, let's demonstrate that it's natural. The core argument goes like this. Nothing that is required for the full flourishing of a thing is merely conventional. Nothing that is required for the full flourishing of a thing is merely conventional. So look, like being healthy human beings is required for the full flourishing of a human being, which means that like eating and drinking is required for our full flourishing. Eating and drinking are not things we do by convention, right? So premise one, nothing required for the full flourishing of a thing is merely conventional, but political society is required for the full flourishing of a thing, namely the human being, right? So that's a core, huge claim, right? Political society is required for the full flourishing of this unique organism, namely the human being. Now, that's probably the one that positivists are going to push back on, so I'm going to prove it to you. But just what follows from those two premises is that political society is not merely conventional. And since by convention and by nature are contradictories, it follows as a corollary from 3, immediately you get political society is by nature. Okay, how are we going to prove that second premise? Well, here's a thought experiment. Imagine a group of perfectly virtuous people who do not live in political society together. Now, I mean, maybe they live as like radical atomic individuals like, American libertarians in Vermont, right? Maybe they live together in families, right? But just the families don't come together to form political society. I don't care, right? Imagine whatever you want. But just the key is that these are perfectly virtuous people. Ask yourself this question. Would their flourishing increase if they did live together in political society? I submit to you, it is obviously the case that the answer is yes. Why? Well, let me give you some examples, right? So if they came together to live in political society, they would then have things like traffic laws. And I think it's obvious that if you have a group of people, like a large group of people, all of whom are perfectly virtuous, but one group has traffic laws and the other group lacks traffic laws, It is contributing to their full flourishing that they have traffic laws, right? It just brings more order to their society, and order that avoids things like accidental death. Here's another example. If they live together in political society, then they'll have things like publicly funded services. And note, we are stipulating at the beginning of the thought experiment that these are perfectly virtuous people, right? So on the one hand, I can make no appeal to like anarchy being bad, right? Which I'm not, right? I'm imagining perfectly virtuous people. So if they didn't have political society, they wouldn't murder each other, they wouldn't steal from each other, right? That's all granted. I'm simply saying this: compare the perfectly virtuous group that lives in political society together and the perfectly virtuous group that doesn't, and the perfectly virtuous group that lives in society together will have many more ways in which they can flourish than the one that doesn't live in political society together. But guess what? If that's true, then political society is required for the full flourishing of the human being. And if that's the case, then premise 2 is demonstrated. So that gives us that political society is natural. What's the argument that it's intrinsic? Well, it goes like this. First, if political society is natural, then the principle of political society must be rooted in some nature, right? So if a nest is natural, then the principle of the nest must be rooted in some nature. But political society is natural. We just proved that. Therefore, the principle of political society must be rooted in some nature. Okay. What nature? Well, I think the principle of non-contradiction and the law of excluded middle are true as logical principles, so I think this is going to be true. That nature will have to be either human nature or some other nature, right? Only 2 options. But look around, right? There is literally no other plausible candidate on earth for a nature that explains political society, right, as a phenomenon. So it seems safe to say that the principle of political society must be rooted in human nature, right? So just as the nature of birds, which build nests by instinct, is the locus for, or the principle of the nest, so too humans, right, and human nature is the locus for political society, the principle of political society. But guess what? Human beings are intrinsic to political society. We are parts of political society. And that means that the principle of political society is intrinsic rather than extrinsic to political society itself. QED, right? Quod erat demonstrandum. So now we've got that political society is a natural and intrinsic unity of order, right? It's obviously a unity of order, and I just gave you arguments that it is a natural one and that it is intrinsic. So that's the kind of thing that political society is, right? It falls in the same class as herds, flocks, packs, etc. It's just that, where there are packs of wolves and, herds of deer and flocks of seagulls, there are polises of humans. Okay. Now I want to prove my first really bold claim, that political society is intrinsically an ethical reality. So here's the argument. Anything that has human nature as its principle is intrinsically ordered to the full flourishing of human nature. Anything that has human nature as its principle is intrinsically ordered to the full flourishing of human nature. So there are lots of things that have human nature as their principle, right? I'm not claiming that political society is unique in this respect, right? So I think that the family is something that has human nature as its principle. I also think that, things that like techne, right? So various expertises have human nature as their principle, right? But whatever has human nature as its principle has to be ordered towards the full flourishing of human nature. Why? Well, you can know that by reductio proof, right? So imagine that were false, right? So imagine that there were a multiplicity of things, all of which had human nature as their principle, and at least one of which was not orderable towards full human flourishing. Well, that would mean that human nature as such is the principle of its own failure to flourish. And I think that's just a kind of that's incoherent on a merely biological level, right? So no wolf, like the nature of wolves is not the principle of multiple incompatible things that prevent wolves from fully flourishing, right? Full flourishing is a possibility for wolves. A fortiori, full flourishing is a possibility for human beings. If that's true, then premise 1 must be true. Premise 2, political society has human nature as its principle. We just proved that. Therefore, political society is intrinsically ordered towards the full flourishing of human nature. Okay? Where is ethics in all of this? Well, the full flourishing of human nature is essentially ethical. Now, note, that's not saying that the only thing relevant for full human flourishing is ethics, right? It's just saying that full flourishing as a human being is ethical in essence. Here's a proof, again by way of thought experiment. So, imagine that there are two people whose lives are exactly the same, right, in all kind of external features, right? So stipulate whatever you want, however they're living. There's the only difference between these two people is this. One of them is prudent, just, courageous, and temperate. The other is imprudent, unjust, cowardly, and intemperate. Ask yourself this question. Is one of them flourishing more as a human being than the other? I submit to you the answer is obviously yes, right? The virtuous man is flourishing more than the vicious man. And in part because, remember, if imprudence is a vice and prudence is a virtue, then part of what that means is that the imprudent man will necessarily fail to achieve a vast multiplicity of his practical aims because he's imprudent, right? So he doesn't have right practical reasoning. And then you can do something similar for any of the other virtues, right? You can identify ways in which cowardice, right, will prevent that man from achieving various ends and aims and goals that he has. So, but if that's true, right, if the virtuous person is flourishing more as a human being than the vicious person, then it must be the case that the full flourishing of the human being is ethical. Why? Well, because we just stipulated that that possessing virtues, which is an ethical thing, right, an ethical matter, is just part and parcel of what it is for us to flourish as human beings. Therefore, political society is intrinsically ordered to something that is essentially ethical. QED. So there's my first, so if that argument holds water, right, I have just proven that it's not that political society is incidentally ethical, right? It's not that that morality is something that matters for polity because it matters just for the members, right? It's that political society as the sort of ordered whole that it is essentially ordered towards the full flourishing of human beings, which means the ethical flourishing of human beings. So it is impossible to have a good society that is not ordered towards the ethical flourishing of its members. And that's not something that occurs by happenstance. It's something that is intrinsic to the polity itself. Now for laws and moral goodness. So my second main, bold, provocative conclusion is that roughly what was said of political society can also be said of concrete individual laws and laws in general. Namely, laws are intrinsically related to the ethical character of political society. So laws are ethical precisely because political society is ethical. And what I mean here is ethical in orientation, not ethical in achievement, right? There are lots of, unethical societies, and from a Thomist perspective, you can have unethical laws, right? So it's not the universal kind of claim that literally any law that is imprudent or unjust or something like that fails to be a law. But this is certainly true from a Thomist perspective. If something in principle cannot be ordered towards the ethical flourishing of a human being, it in principle cannot be a law, which is a bold enough claim. So let's now prove it. First, we've already seen that all unities of order have an internal structure, right? And this is a natural claim, right? So we see this in brute animals. We see this in natural artifacts like beehives and nests and anthills. We also see this in the conventional sphere, right? So we see this with bowling leagues and fan clubs. And we see this in artifacts like clocks and microphones. All unities of order have an internal structure. Political society is a unity of order, so political society has an internal structure. But guess what? We also noticed earlier that all internal structures are designated as good or bad vis-a-vis the external aim of the unity that they structure, right? So it's a bad structure for a clock to have, for it to be really big and the numbers to be really small. It's a bad structure for a doorknob to have if it is made out of razor blades, right? It's a bad structure for a chair to be made out of bubbles, right? The external aim of the unity of order, it gives us a litmus test for determining the goodness or badness of the internal structure. But all laws are internal structures of political society. And now, just a note here. I am not providing that premise as a definition of law, right? In fact, I think that's not the definition of law, right? All I'm saying is that this is a feature that is true of all laws. Laws are structuring principles for society, right? And that, I take it, should be non-controversial even across legal theory traditions, right? Austin and Oliver Wendell Holmes, right, and von Jhering will all agree with premise 5, right? So I would be interested, if you can think of a legal theorist who thinks that premise 5 is false, I would be fascinated to learn that. But I take it that premise 5 is non-controversial, right? At least if it's not taken as, if it's not interpreted as a definition of law. But from 4 and 5, 6 follows. All laws are designated as good or bad vis-a-vis the external aim of political society. But guess what? We just proved that the external aim of political society is essentially ethical. Therefore, all laws are designated as good or bad vis-a-vis something that is essentially ethical. If 8 is true, legal positivism is false. There's a claim for you, right? So if you want to continue to be a legal positivist, if any of you are, right, then here's what you have to do. You have to find some premise in that argument and show that it is wrong, right? Because the argument is valid. It's just modus ponens the whole way down. So if you want to reject the conclusion, you have to find a premise that is false. If you cannot find a premise that is false, come to my side, right? Cross the waters from legal positivism to the natural law tradition. Because the conclusion of this argument just entails straightforwardly the error of legal positivism. So let me conclude just by making some observations. First, I have argued, one, that political society is intrinsically ethical, and two, that laws are intrinsically related to that ethical character of political society. If that's right, then politics is actually a branch of ethics. Or at least there is something that we can identify as politics that really would be a branch of ethics, right? Maybe if you want to just stipulate that by politics I mean what Machiavelli does, then fine, nolo contendere, right? But there will be something that is identifiable as politics that is in fact a branch of ethics. Also, if that's right, then all three of the definitions of law with which we began are wrong. And in fact, any purely positivist definition of law will be wrong. Notice what I have not argued. I have not argued in this presentation that any particular first-order ethical content is essential to political society or to its laws. So I have not argued that, like, virtue theory, right, is the correct, like, first-order ethical theory. I have not argued that utilitarianism is the correct first-order ethical theory. I have not argued that deontological ethics is the correct first-order ethical theory, right? Because all ethicists endorse the ethical relevance of virtue just to the extent that I appealed to it in this argument, right? So I have given you no concrete details about first-order ethical theory. Why am I hammering that home? Well, I think we can and should and must think about those questions, right? I have views on first-order ethical theory, but I haven't done it here. That's important because, as far as I can tell, the most common objection to the natural law legal tradition is that it goes something like this. Look, if you're a natural lawyer, you're packing in to the notion of law some kind of problematic or objectionable commitments with respect to, like, ethics. And we don't want that. I have done no such thing in this argument. And if that's the case, then what it means is you can know the fact that politics and law are essentially ethics-oriented without yet presupposing any commitments about first-order ethics. So if the argument that I've given you this evening holds water, I've not just argued against legal positivism, I've also undercut the most common argument of legal positivism against the natural law tradition, right? No presuppositions about first-order ethical content have appeared in this presentation, which means the standard argument against natural law theory holds no water. So, knowing that law and politics are essentially ethical, where do we move from here? Well, now the task remains that we should investigate what the proper ethics is. What is the rich first-order ethical content of full human flourishing? But that's a question for later, right? What we've done now is just establish the fact that law and politics are essentially ethical. Thanks. Do we have time for Q&A?
Yes,
Great.
yes, this is exactly what I wanted to start now. So please, questions from the public. Yeah, Mihai, please.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It was a wonderful demonstration for the natural law, what we started here 5 years ago together with our dear professors. My question would be related, of course, to value of the natural law, as I consider that this could be qualified. During the history, the political society demonstrated that for its development, always needed a value, and this was the private property, in our opinion. And this private property as a value developed also at the beginning the natural persons, and after all, for sure, legal persons, as we have now. Therefore, anyhow, we see in different parts of the society also a problem with this aspect, and we see always that this private property, or better saying, the idea of acquiring properties, capital, is not perceived, let's say, in the same way all over the world. Yeah. So from this perspective, can we claim in the end that the private property as a value is essentially has an ethical character? Can we continue to believe in this aspect, as I said, based on what we see in a different part of the society today?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that's a great question. And so as I said at the beginning of this presentation, I stand before you as a Thomist political philosopher and legal theorist. And so we Thomists are one eminent, long-lived strand of the natural law tradition. But so actually on this point, I take it that there is a dispute among representatives of the natural law tradition as to the extent to which private property, the right to private property belongs to the natural law. So I belong to the strand of natural law theory that maintains that private property is correctly designated as a secondary and not a primary right. The distinction goes like this. Things that are primary rights according to the natural law are things that straightforwardly and in an absolute or unconditioned way pertain to the full flourishing of the human being, right? So they are sine qua non wherever human nature is found. And private property, so I maintain private property is actually not one of them. There are natural law arguments, what are called from fittingness arguments that are as opposed to a pure demonstration. So here are some examples of the kinds of arguments that like Aquinas gives for private property. In general, human beings are such that we care more about what is ours individually than what is held in common. So if we want certain goods to be cared for best in a kind of maximally efficient way, then we ought to have private property. We ought to allow for the allocation of goods to individual people because in general they will take care of it. Here's another argument that he gives, one that would make Marx roll over in his grave. So the argument goes like this. In general, it's easier for human beings to be satisfied with when things can be identified as belonging to them than when things are held in common. Therefore, if all things are held in common, you are more likely to have strife, division, and war, right? So from Aquinas' perspective, communal ownership increases the likelihood of violence, it doesn't decrease it, right? Precisely because it increases general dissatisfaction among human beings. But note, all of those arguments, they proceed from, they're what are called hypothetical arguments. So they say, look, if we want to achieve such and such, then this is in general a good means to do so. That's not the same kind of argument as saying, without such and such, human nature cannot flourish. And so actually, so in the Thomist, both ethical and legal tradition, there's a doctrine that we have called the universal destination of goods. And so the idea is that, look, what are concrete consumables for? They're for human flourishing and like for human life. And so in fact, if you had a human being who was literally on death's door and another human being who was not, so one who is literally starving and another who has an abundance of food, precisely because of what food is by nature oriented towards, the end for which it is ordered, it cannot be made private property when someone who could have it is literally in danger of death, right? So it doesn't belong to, there is no private ownership of food when someone who could eat it is starving, right? Now, no, that's not at all the same thing as like Peter Singer's argument, right? That like anybody who can make a donation to starving children in Africa must make a donation to starving children in Africa, right? Like those are categorically different claims, right? But it's relevant for your point because it means that from a Thomist perspective, private property actually does not belong to the natural law absolutely. It belongs to the natural law conditionally or hypothetically. And we say that means it is a secondary precept of the natural law, not a primary precept. Yeah, great question. Yeah, Theodore.
Can you hear me? Okay. So, I mean, this is a more empirical question, so I don't know how that's going to go, but so if we live in a society that is overwhelmingly rejecting not only like the types of ethical theories, so like what type of ethical theory to choose, but like it's rejecting all the premises that you have just proved, then in practice, like how do you think your theory can reply to that?
Great. So I think actually I don't think it would be very easy for you to find an example of a society that rejects most of the premises. So like, let's just go back to, rather than think sort of theoretically about these things. Come on. Okay, let's just take this one, right? So I'm not aware of any societies that as a whole reject the empirical fact that there are unities of order. Yeah.
But like for 8, for example, like premise 8. So if there are radically different interpretations of like what is good or bad, then like how does that still stand?
Oh yeah. So okay. So yeah. So actually, so this is an important thing that I was really trying to emphasize at the end, right? So by the end of this talk, we don't yet have anything like a fleshed out first order theory of ethics, right? So, and I actually think that's a virtue of the argument that I've given you, not a vice, right? Because it means that in principle, let's say that one of you thinks that like ethics is relative, right? So like you are an ethical relativist. Fine. I mean, not fine, right? There are lots of reasons why you should not, none of you should be ethical relativists. But with respect to the argument that I've just given you, there's no problem here, right? If you're an ethical relativist in the room, here's what you should think, given what I just told you. You should think all politics and all law are ethically oriented. The correct first order ethics is relativistic ethics. Therefore, all law and all politics are essentially oriented towards relativistic ethics. If you are a utilitarian, you shouldn't be, right? None of you should be utilitarians. Don't do that. But if you are utilitarians, here's what you should think at the end of this talk. You should think all politics and or all political society and all laws are ethically oriented. The correct account of ethics is utilitarianism. So all ethics and or all politics and all laws are oriented towards an ethical reality that is correctly evaluated according to utilitarianism. If you are a deontologist, here's what you should think, right? Like, law and politics are ethically oriented. The correct ethics is deontological ethics. Therefore, all law and all politics are oriented towards something that is correctly evaluated on a deontological basis, right? And then rinse and repeat for pick any ethical theory, right? So suppose you live in, and this is not hard to imagine, right? Suppose you live in a society where there's a vast plurality and diversity of commitments to first order ethical theories. What should we do in light of this talk? That, the very last thing, right? So we should all agree on the essentially ethical character of political society and laws, and then we should go debate what the correct first order ethical theory is, right? So we should care a lot about whether utilitarianism is true or deontological ethics is true or virtue ethics is true, and in fact we should care more after this talk than we did before. Because if this talk has succeeded in what it set out to prove, then we should all now be convinced that what's at issue in the debates between utilitarians, Kantians, and Aristotelians is not just first order ethics on an individual level, but also what politics is aiming for, what laws are actually all about. And so, yeah, so the answer is, if you live in a pluralist society, debate. Fight the good fight, right? Try to convince the people with whom you live by giving them rational arguments. But yeah, but the onus is on us to give reasons. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Please.
Okay. I don't have an issue with the idea that political philosophy is intrinsically ethical, but I would like to ask you a question regarding one of your premises, regarding the premise, anything that has human nature as its principle is intrinsically ordered to the full flourishing of human nature. I believe that this premise has the presupposition in itself that human nature is intrinsically good, and at the same time you argue that a wolf cannot go against a wolf, but I don't think that the same is with human beings, and we have enough proof about that, about humanity being on the brink of destruction, self-destruction, and I would like to know what's your opinion on that.
Excellent question, thank you. Yeah, so this premise is not intended to be interpreted as saying that human nature is fundamentally good, right? So St. Thomas Aquinas learned a whole lot from St. Augustine, and St. Augustine is pretty pessimistic about human nature, right? So another way to put it, if now for the first moment ever, the talk is done, so I'll put on my theologian's hat for a second. One way to say is just, look, I think original sin goes real deep. And so, not maybe as deep as like Calvinists think it does, right? But yeah, I don't interpret that premise as meaning that like all humans are like essentially fundamentally morally good, right? I think that being morally good is part of our full flourishing, right? Part of what it is to fully flourish as a human nature, as a human being. But that's really hard, right? Like most of us fail to be fully flourishing human beings, right? Most flowers eventually wilt, right? And most human beings are pretty miserable. So this is not at all claiming that like we all get there. Here's what this is claiming. So this is not claiming that human nature is fundamentally good. It's claiming that human nature is fundamentally coherent. And that's what it shares with the nature of a wolf, with the nature of, of a sheep, right? So let me give you a purely natural example of something that would be incoherent, right? If the nature of wolves was such that it was the principle of their eating meat and it was the principle of their not eating meat, a wolf couldn't survive, right? Because from its nature would spring two things that are contradictory with one another, right? So that's what's going on in this premise. So this premise is saying that that anything that has human nature as its principle is intrinsically ordered towards the full flourishing of human nature, where the full flourishing of human nature is something coherent, right? So human nature can't be the principle of one thing that is orderable to full human flourishing and another thing that's not orderable to full human flourishing. So yeah, but I mean, I agree with you that we can do things that prevent our full flourishing, like be wicked, right? Just like a flower can do things, right, that are contrary to its full flourishing, right? Like it can fail to get enough sunlight, it can fail to be in rich soil, etc. But no, you don't have to think that human beings are, you don't have to be like a radical anthropological optimist to endorse premise one.
Yeah, no, I was just, totally agree, and I'll put some further thought into it. I was also thinking that there's a difference between a wolf fighting a wolf for the continuation of the species, so the best wolf gets to survive. It's not the same with men. So when fight, they can bring upon their destruction. So, yeah.
Yes. So I 100% agree, and I do think. I mean, we were talking about this a little bit earlier. It is important to note when we talk about kind of the natural law and the natural law tradition here, right? That we're not. So it is correctly interpreted, and especially the classical natural law theory is correctly interpreted as being sensitive to species differences, right? So what is according to the nature of a wolf is not going to be the same as what's according to the nature of a spider, is not going to be the same thing as what's according to the nature of an amoeba, right? Is not going to be the same as what's according to the nature of a human, right? And so there are tons of things that are unique to human nature, right? So I'm not trying to reduce like politics and ethics to biology, right? That's not at all the claim, right? The claim is just this, that humans have natures just like wolves have natures, just like flowers have natures, right? And we can talk about the full flourishing of a flower, we can talk about the full flourishing of a wolf, and we can talk about the full flourishing of a human, and what that full flourishing looks like will be determined by the things that spring from human nature.
I would have a following question to this. So, if you are saying that the most of the individuals of a group are prone to being flawed, and we aggregate them in a group, doesn't this entails that the group as a structure will be rather flawed than virtuous, since virtue is an exception in terms of numbers? This is one thought. And another thought starts from comparing man to wolves. Hobbes said with the famous Homo homini lupus, he mentioned in the dedication page that he refers not to the individual man, but to the societies, to political societies. He says, because he was living in the 17th century England, he says, societies, when act towards another, they act like wolves and they fight each other. Not individual men fight each other, but political societies of men fight each other. States fight each other. So, if man individually taken could be good, how it comes that when put in a society, more men become or transform the society as having a rather evil nature than a good nature?
Yeah. Great question. So with respect to the first part, I would say this. So the group that you've described is, empirically it's bad, right? But normatively it's not, right? So you can look, like, it might be the case that that we live in a society. Yeah. So suppose you live in a society where it is the custom for women's feet to be bound extremely tight in such a way that it breaks the bones, right, of the feet, and it makes walking difficult, et cetera, right? Such a society has in fact existed in the past, right? The fact that the vast majority of women statistically in that society have feet with broken bones doesn't mean that, like, having broken bones is normative for that society. It just, right? So statistical majority is not the same thing as normativity, right? And so the natural law tradition makes all of its arguments based on the normativity of natures, not the statistical majority of some set, right, that you've studied. And I take it that's an extremely important distinction so I thank you for bringing it up, right? Because if you are thinking of the natural law tradition as going something like this, well, look at what most people in a society do, or how most people in a society develop, and then take that as normative, right? That is opposed to the natural law tradition, not an expression of it. With respect to the second question, okay, sorry, give it to me again. Remind me.
So, if good individuals create bad societies.
Oh yeah. So if you were to show me, I would just want an example. So show me an example of a political society, or even like a family, where the majority, so show me a case where the majority of the family members are
Nazi
virtuous.
Germany and current day Russia. The vast majority of the population is good, and yet the society ended up bad.
Okay, good. So, yeah, I mean, I'm an Augustinian enough to probably think that the vast majority of the society is bad. But let me just spot you that premise, right? So let's just assume that the vast majority of the populace is in fact like virtue, like genuinely virtuous in the Aristotelian sense of virtue, right? So like not self-controlled, right? Like not the encratic man, right? But like actually genuinely has virtue such that they do the morally good thing promptly, easily, and joyfully as if it were second nature, okay? Because that's what virtue is. So I don't think the majority of people are like that. But let me just spot you the premise, right? That the majority of Russians are such that they do the morally right thing promptly, easily, and joyfully as if it were second nature. How could it be that the society is a bad society? Well, because society has on a Thomistic account, right, you can give so for any unity of order that we were talking about earlier, you can give a four causal analysis of a unity of order. So you can talk about its formal cause, you can talk about its final cause, you can talk about its material cause, and you can talk about its efficient cause. The citizens of a polis are the material cause of the polis. The formal cause of the polis is its constitution and laws. And so the society as a hylomorphic composite, now I am going to do some Aristotelian stuff, right? So the society as a hylomorphic composite is not just the citizens or just the laws, it's the union of the citizens and the laws. And so if you have bad laws and good citizens, you still nevertheless have a bad society. And what's the measure for determining whether laws are good or bad? Not the citizens, but I've already given it to you here, right? The external end of the society. So if the laws, the structuring principles of the polis are such that they don't contribute to the full flourishing of the human beings, then the formal cause is objectively identifiable as bad. And so yeah, you have a bad society because it's bad on the side of the form, not bad on the side of the matter. Mic drop. Yeah.
Well, I'm a bit hung up on the first thought experiment, and I am sorry, but I have taken one of the premises made by Mr. Rizoiu. Well, so the purpose of law is common good and virtue, and the purpose of law is, as such, para contrario, the eradication or prevention of vice. And the full flourishing of human, then the full flourishing of the human population is dependent on the existence of political society, which in turn implies the existence of laws. Does this not mean that the existence of laws implies the existence of vice, and therefore laws would not be possible in the group that is perfectly virtuous?
Excellent question. So no, I think that it's perfectly coherent to imagine a community of perfectly virtuous people who live together in society and have laws, have like positive human laws, right? So I don't think, there are some representatives of the natural law tradition who go, in my mind, too extreme, and so would say something like this: if you have a perfectly virtuous populace, the only laws that they will live by are natural law. I think that's false. And I think, and the purpose of that thought experiment was to show that it's false, right? I think if you have a perfectly virtuous populace that lives in a society that lives together in such a way that they have cars and roads, the perfectly virtuous populace will in fact create traffic laws. And so now actually let me flip it around on you. So I actually think that the correct conclusion to draw from that thought experiment is actually that the other thing is impossible. I think it is impossible to imagine a group of perfectly virtuous people who live together but do not have positive human law. Why? Well, because now what you're asking me to imagine is this. Imagine perfectly virtuous people who live together but not in society, and they don't have traffic laws. But wait, they have cars? Yes. They have roads? Yes. Well, in that case, failing to develop traffic laws is just imprudent. But guess what? Prudence is a virtue. So if you are imagining perfectly virtuous people, you are not imagining the kinds of people who would live together only according to the natural law. You're imagining precisely the kinds of people who would create good, right, prudent, wise, positive human laws to structure their society.
You should see Bucharest traffic at rush hour.
Remember, I live in Rome, right? In Rome, they have a marvelous phrase, "che disastro," right?
And also, I think there is also a theological argument. Before the original sin, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden lived in accordance with some set of rules that God let to them. Of course, they disobeyed one of those rules, and then we appeared.
I think we're at time. So just thank you all so much. This has been a lot of fun. Yeah.
Thank you.